Hello, my name is Sarah Herzog, and this is a tutorial to teach you how to create a player health system and hazards in your Unity game. Now this is part 2 of a 5-part tutorial, okay? And in this part, we will cover how to actually add numerical values for your health, and so that your hazard that will damage your player will only do a set amount of damage instead of instantly killing them. So this tutorial will build on part 1. So if you have not yet completed part 1, please go back and do that first, because we will be assuming that you have completed that portion. And part 1 will show you how to set up an instant kill mechanic so that your player will be killed when they run into a hazard. So in the last part, we set up a simple system for one-hit kill using a condition, and the condition was when the player runs into a hazard, and an action, destroy the player, destroy the player's game object. So we combined those two things. We used separate scripts for the condition and the action. Now in this part, we're going to keep the exact same condition because it's still whenever you run into an object, when you run into the hazard, but instead of killing the player outright, it's going to deal damage to them. So the action is going to be something more like change a value, and that value is for your health. We'll then need to add a new condition action pair, and that is going to still kill the players. The action will then be kill the player, but the condition will now be if the player's health value reaches 0. So we are adding an extra condition and action in between the running into the item and the dying. We now have this extra level of value where we have our player having a health value, and that's going to decrease, and then only when that is 0 we kill the player. So we're going to add a new function to our player called change health, and that's where the action for changing that health value will occur, and it's also where the condition for checking if the health has reached 0 will occur. So this new function will have the action for the first part and the condition for the second pair of condition action. Okay, so to start off with, you're going to open back up your player health.cs file, your player health file. So in your Unity project, go down to your project section, find your scripts, and double click player health to open that up. And it will open up in Visual Studio. And inside here, you will find the code that we made during our last tutorial. So it was very simple. On the player side, we just had a single function, kill, and that function only destroyed a game object. And remember, this was a custom function. It's not part of Unity. It's a function we wrote, and that means that our code will have to call it. So remember that our code in hazard calls player kill. That's the action in the hazard there. So let's add some more to our player health script. That's what we're going to start off doing. Okay, so we're going to need to add a few things here. The first thing we're going to need to add are some variables, and variables are like containers for data, and we need some that are going to stick around for this player script, and they're going to last for a while. They're going to last for the entire life of the player. Okay, so we add these long-term variables up at the top of the script. Now remember that these outer curly braces contain everything inside the script, and these variables are part of our script, so they need to be added inside the curly braces, but outside of the function curly braces. So remember these big outside ones here, those are the class, the script curly braces, and these ones, these are the function curly braces. We need to put our variables outside of the function, but inside of the class, okay? So we're going to create a variable here, and the way that you create a variable is by simply saying the type of variable that it is, and for our health, we want a integer variable. And integers mean whole numbers. That means numbers that cannot have decimal points. And for our health system, that makes sense. So you can just write int, and then you need to give your variable a name. So I recommend using a very clear name, and this variable is going to represent the starting health for our player. So I'm just going to call it starting health. Now, notice no spaces. You cannot have spaces in variable names. The computer will not understand it. So instead of having a space, I just have a capital letter for the second word. Now you notice the first letter is lowercase. That's a pretty common way of writing your variable names. Okay, so I recommend using that, and that is a style called camel case, and that's what I recommend for your variable name. So a lowercase starting letter, but then any later words in the name will be capitalized. Okay, and then at the end you need a semicolon. Now this isn't quite finished. We actually need one extra thing. So this is declaring a variable. It's declaring an integer called starting health. But we also need to be able to edit this variable in the Unity editor. So we're going to add the word public at the front. Okay, public. All right, that will allow us to edit this variable in the Unity editor and to access this variable from other scripts if we wanted to do that. Okay, so let's add a note here. Remember that we can use comments to add notes for ourselves. So we can say, this will be the starting health for the player. Now you don't have to copy these notes exactly. I'm using these notes just so that when you're watching the video, you can remind yourself what everything does. You don't have to include them at all, but I would recommend at least including one line to remind yourself of what each variable is for. Okay, so I'm going to add the word public. It means it's shown in the Unity editor and accessible from other scripts. Okay, and then let's add int equals whole number. We'll remember that that's what the int means. Okay. All right, let's add another variable. So that's the starting health, but remember that our starting health will always remain the same. We shouldn't ever be changing that, but our current health will change over time. So let's go ahead and add a new variable to keep track of current health. Okay, so let's just say int current health. Now this one does not need to change in the Unity editor because we will just set our current health to be equal to our starting health whenever we start the game. So we don't need to set this in the Unity editor. So we can leave it without the public word at the front. Okay. So we can make a note of what this is. This will be the player's current health and will change as the game goes on, right? Okay, that's the variables that we'll need. So next we need to actually set our current health to be equal to our starting health when our script first starts. Now we can do that in two different places if we wanted to. You may have seen whenever you create a new Unity script, it uses the start function by default, but we're not going to actually use that function here. We're going to use the awake function, and the awake function actually happens before start. It happens very early on, and that's fine for this situation, and we want to use it if we can. So let's add that function. This is a built-in Unity function, and that means you have to spell it exactly correctly or Unity won't call it. Okay, so we've got void as a start of the function, then awake with a capital A and our parentheses. Okay, so we can add a note here. Built-in Unity function called when the script is created. Okay, and that is usually when the game starts or when this object is spawned, if you spawn in objects later. Okay, and we can note this happens before the start function. So sometimes that matters. Okay, just so you know in the future. Okay, so awake is usually used for initialization. So we can initialize. That's what it means to set up the initial value, the first value that a variable has. And later the value might change, but initialization means setting it up at the beginning, putting some starting value into it. So we're going to use the starting health that we'll have set in Unity. We're going to use that to initialize our current health. Okay, so you can say here, initialize our current health to be equal, I can type, to our starting health at the beginning of the game. Okay, and let's make this on a new line so it's not quite so long. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, it's very simple. If we want to set a variable equal to something else, we simply say current health equals, that's going to put a different value into that variable container, because variables are just like containers for data. So into the current health container, we're going to put the same value that is in starting health. All right, that will copy the value out of starting health and put it into the current health container. Okay, so the next step there, after we've done that, is we're going to add a new function. So we still have kill, and that's fine. We're going to still use kill. We're just not going to call it in the same place. So don't delete kill, leave that alone. But we're going to add a new function. So after awake, we're going to add a new custom function. This is not one that is built into Unity, so you can actually name it whatever you like. But I'm going to name mine change health. And this function will allow us to change the player's health, either by making it go up if they maybe got a healing item, or making it go down if they took damage from an enemy. Okay, so let's add a function. Remember, functions start with the word void, and that is only if they don't have a return type. In this case, this doesn't have a return type, so it's void. And we are going to name this change health. So void change health, notice capital C, capital H, no spaces. Okay, and then we need parentheses to show that this is a function, and then we'll have our curly braces. Now, this is a function that needs a bit more information, because if we're going to change the health, we don't want to always assume that we're going to change it by 1. Because you might have some enemies that deal only 1 damage, and you might have nastier enemies or nastier hazards that deal 2 damage. Same thing with a healing item. You might have some healing items that are 1 health healing and some that are 2 or 3 health healing, or however much. So we want to be able to change how much we change the health by. And we do that by using a parameter. So inside change health, in the parentheses there, we're going to add a parameter. And a parameter is just a special kind of variable that allows us to pass information into our function when we call it. Okay, so let's go ahead and type the word int. And that will say that our parameter is going to be an integer. It's going to be a whole number. And then we'll give our parameter a name, and that's just like a variable. You can name variables whatever you like. I'm going to call this one change amount, but you can name yours differently if you want. But do notice that I use the same variable naming style as I did up above, where I had a lowercase c and then an uppercase A and no spaces. No spaces is very important. Okay, we're almost done naming this function, but there's actually one more problem. This function needs to be accessed from other scripts. So just like we did with kill, we need to put the word public at the front here, because if anything is going to be accessible from another script, or in this case from our hazard is going to be the one changing the health, then that function needs to be publicly available, and that will allow other scripts to use that function. If you don't put public there, the other script will not be able to use the function. So you need to put the word public. Okay, so let's add a note for what this is doing. So this is a not built into Unity. We must call it ourselves. And this will change the player's current health and kill them. And I'm putting kill like the function. Kill them if they have less than, or if they have 0 health or less. Does that make sense? That's the plan. And we'll maybe add a note, public, so other scripts can access it. Again, you don't have to write all of that. You can write nothing if you like, but I would recommend giving yourself at least a small note of what it was you're planning to do with this function. Okay, so now we have a plan. We said we are going to change the player's current health and kill them if they have 0 health or less. So let's do the first part of that first, and that's our action. Remember how we had a plan where we had 2 conditions and actions. So our first condition and action was condition when the player runs into a hazard, action reduce their health. So that's the first part. So let's do that first. We've done we'll get to the condition, but the action here is inside change health, and that's going to be reducing the player's health. So to do that, we're just going to say, we're going to be changing our current health, and that's the variable we need. So we know we're going to need to access our current health. And in fact, we know we're going to need to set our current health to be a different value. Okay, so you can say current health equals, but what do we want it to be equal to? We want it to be equal to its current value, but changed by however much we've said to change it by. And the amount we want to change it by is that parameter. Okay, so in order to change it based on that parameter, we simply say current health equals current health plus change amount. So if the change amount is positive, it'll be like we've healed. And if the change amount is negative, it will be like we took damage. And that's how we can change our health by that amount. So we'll take whatever our current health value is, we'll add or subtract whatever we've said to add or subtract. And the result of that will be stored back into our current health variable. So let's add a note here what we're doing. Take our current health, add the change amount, and store the result back in the current health variable. And I'm going to make this on a new line so it's a little bit easier to read. Okay, so we have now set our current health. Now we have a problem though, because say you start with 5 health and then you pick up a healing item. In most games, you don't want to go above your starting health. The same thing is if you have 1 health left and you take 2 damage. You don't usually want to go into negative numbers for your health. So what we're going to do here is something called a clamp. And a clamp is a function that keeps your current health between 2 values, a minimum and a maximum. Okay, so that's very easy to do. We simply say current health equals, okay, so we are going to put whatever the value that we clamp it to back inside our current health. And we then say mathf, which is a special library of math functions. Dot, which means go to the library, go to this bunch of functions that we can use, and we're going to get the clamp function. Okay, and that is a built-in function to Unity, so you have to make sure you use it, say the name exactly right. Okay, so mathf.clamp, and then inside the parentheses, this function wants us to say 3 things. The value that we're going to clamp, so that's the current health. The minimum value for that, which will be 0. We don't want to go below 0. And the maximum value, which is going to be your starting health. You don't want to go above the starting health. So we say current health, 0, starting health. And then a semicolon at the end. So let's add a note here. Keep our current health between 0 and the starting health value. Okay, that's what that clamp does. Okay, so we have now accomplished our first action. Our second condition action pair is if our health drops to 0, then kill the player. So our condition is if the health drops to 0, our action is kill the player. So we already have an action for kill the player. It's that function that we had before. Okay, we're going to keep that. But we need to do a condition here. So this is a really simple condition. It's just an if statement. Okay, now the question is then where to put this if statement. You could put it in the update loop, but we have no reason to do that because the only time our health is changing is in the change health function. So we don't need to check anywhere else. We only have to check inside the change health function. Okay, so let's go ahead and say in just text to start with, if our health drops to 0, that means the player should die. Okay, so we do that by saying if parenthesis current health equals 0. Now, why did I use 2 equal signs? Because if statements need 2 equal signs inside them. Because it doesn't mean the same thing as this equals up here. We're not putting equals into our current health. That's the opposite of what we want. We don't want to just set our current health to be 0. We are comparing it to 0. So when you're using an equal sign for comparison, you need 2 of them. That's very important, okay? So if current health equals 0, then kill. All right, that's all we have to do. So we can say in here, we call the kill function to kill the player. All right, pretty simple. So just like we used to do inside hazard, when you ran into the hazard, we immediately died. Now we only die when we detect that our health has reached 0. Okay, that's all we have to change in the player's health section. Let's now go to the hazard. So if yours isn't already open, mine is open here, but if yours isn't already open in Visual Studio, go back to Unity, go down and find your hazard script and double click it to open it in Visual Studio. But mine was already open here. Okay, so this is our hazard script from before. We aren't going to have to change very much. We are going to add a class-wide variable to hazard, a setting, just like we had in player health, for the amount of damage the hazard should do. And then we're going to, instead of killing the player, we're going to deal damage using our change health function that we just wrote. Okay, so first of all, let's add our variable. This is at the top of hazard, right? Inside the curly braces for our hazard class, because this variable will still be part of our hazard script. Okay, so just like before, it's going to be public, and that's because we want to edit it in Unity. It's going to be an integer, an int, because just like our health values, our damage value does not need any decimal points. And the name of it, let's call it hazard damage. You may name it whatever you like. This is your own custom name. It does not have to match anything existing in Unity already. I'm going to name mine hazard damage. And you can leave a note for yourself as to what this is. This will be the amount of damage the hazard does. You can have different hazards and you can just put different values in there. And just remember that public means editable in Unity, and int equals whole number. And again, you don't have to write that, but I would recommend at least writing this top one or some kind of notes for yourself. Okay. Next, we only have to make one more change. That's in here. So instead of saying perform our action, which is killing the player, we're going to not do that. We're not going to kill the player. Instead, we're still going to do something to the player. So we need that variable we've got here, player. All right, so player. And then we're still going to do something on the player. And to do that, we need to use the dot. So dot means go to that thing and do something. And this time, instead of kill, we're going to call the function change health. Okay, so it'll be player dot change health. We need a parenthesis. And then we need to pass along a value. So the value we want to pass along is how much the health should be changed. And that's going to be equal to our hazard damage. So let's put in hazard damage there. Oops, sorry. But there's one change we need to make. If hazard damage is positive, then we want this to be negative because we want our player to be damaged, to be hurt. So let's put a negative sign inside our change health. Change health, negative hazard damage. Okay, save that. So if you've got that all done, we should now be able to see this in effect in Unity. Let's go back to Unity now. And click on your player. So at this point, your player should now have a player health script on them already from whenever we attached it in the last tutorial. And starting health will be set to 0. We don't want that. So I'm going to set my starting health for my player to 5. I would recommend you do the same so you can follow along. Then you can change it later. Okay, but I would suggest for now, set it to 5 as well so you can see if this is working correctly for you. And then for your spike or your hazard or whatever you have for a hazard, I'm going to change the hazard damage to 2. So what we should see is that our player should be able to run into this spike twice and survive. And on the third time they run into the spike, they will die because If you get hit, if you have 5 health and the spike hits you once, that's down to 3. If it hits you again, that's down to 1. And if it hits you a third time, you'll die. This will let us see that it is indeed taking off 2 pieces of health at a time and that we have 5 health. Okay, so let's go ahead and press play. And I'm going to use my on-screen controls. You can use whatever controls you have. So I've ran into it once. I've ran into it again. And I ran into a third time and my character was killed. They were deleted. So hopefully that worked for you as well. This is the end of the second tutorial. In the 3rd, 4th, and 5th tutorials, I will be showing you different ways to make your health visible on the screen. But before we get to that point, let's briefly talk about troubleshooting. So you maybe didn't have this work correctly on the first try, and that's absolutely okay. All right, so if you did need help, remember to check your error messages. Okay, very carefully read them. Try to see what they say and double click them to go to that place in your code and try changing the code to match what they've said to do. Okay, so if they say there's a semicolon missing or they don't understand a variable that you've used, check your spelling, check your semicolons, etc. Spelling is one of the most important things here, and capitalization. Remember that especially for the built-in Unity functions, your spelling has to match exactly with what I did here or it will not work, okay, because Unity won't know what you're doing. So it's very important that you check that. The other thing that you can do is if you have your player selected, I'm going to go ahead and select my player now. And if I press play, I can actually cheat and see another variable here. So right now by default on your player, all you can see is the starting health because that's what we said we want exposed in Unity. But we can actually cheat to see the hidden current health of the player. And we can do that by, in the inspector window, on the right hand side, you'll see a couple lines. And if you click on those lines and you choose debug, you get a bunch more information, and some of it's really unhelpful and overly verbose. But in our player script here, you can see that we actually have a current health displayed. So if now I run into this thing, my health have actually gone down to 3. So I can actually see it changing in real time. Now it's gone down to 1, and now I've been deleted. So this might help you to tell what is going wrong with your player if you check that, okay? So that is some ideas, but if you do get stuck, feel free to ask in the comments below and I might be able to help you out. Okay, so one other thing I should note, you can use the same approach that I have used here. I created a hazard, but you could use the same approach to create a healing item. Exactly the same approach. You would just need to change from, make a new script instead of hazard, make a script called healing or something, and use the same exact type of code inside, but instead of a negative, adding a negative to it, you will just leave it as a positive number when you use change health on the player. So you can use that to add healing items. Okay, so in terms of what to do next, we have 3 tutorials. Part 3, which is the next one, that will tell you how to do a text display for your health. So if you just wanted to show a number for your health, and it's very easy, that's the one you do. If you then instead would like it to show a maybe heart icons like in Legend of Zelda for your health, then go to part 4. Okay, and if you'd prefer a health bar instead of either of those other options, that's part 5. So I'll show you how to do all 3 of those in the next 3 parts. So you don't have to watch all 3 of them, just choose whichever one you prefer and watch that one to carry on. All right, well, thank you very much for watching. And I hope you continue on to the next section if you are interested in learning more. If you have any questions, again, feel free to ask them down in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, go ahead and give me a like and consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you very much. Have a good day.